Welcome back. Last time, if you recall, we looked at some of the differences in manifest destiny, how there were those nations, or those states I should say, those people who moved westward simply for material gain, simply really for reasons of greed, and they often had no trouble in cheating, say, the natives out of their land. And that's something you see in American history, particularly in the 19th century. But really, that's not what drives American history or what drove American success. My whole argument is that what drove that success was the common farmer who was backed by that foremost institution of religion. Well, in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how religion itself was attacked. We're going to take a look really at this whole concept that when you have an idea, that idea always has consequences. That idea is always lived out in some way and affects the choices that you make and affects how you actually live your life based upon your ideas or your ideals. And really, when you look at American history, particularly that whole realm of early America, you see that they had an incredible free market of ideas. There was incredibly open ability to ask, what is the truth? What this meant was it was a consistent opportunity for the gospel to go forward. It meant there was a consistent opportunity for people to actually show forth what the scriptures say, what God has said about himself, how he is holy, how he is infinite, how he made everything. What God has said about us, how we're made in his image yet fallen due to our own choices. And what God has said about salvation, how Christ has actually provided a solution for sin, a solution for evil, a solution for the harm that we do to ourselves, do to others, and attempt to do to God, as well as a solution for that final problem of man, which is death itself. But as much as early America was a free market for the gospel itself, it was also a free market for ideas that were not the gospel, for fake gospels, for counterfeit gospels, or for what we simply call cults. Cults are typically groups of people who gather usually around one person or maybe around one idea, and they establish some kind of off-brand of the truth. They establish what really is another religion, but it's always false in some kind of key ideal. But they always share a common culture. In fact, the whole Latin for that word, which is cultus, means to worship. And so in other words, they worship either the wrong God or they worship the true God, but they worship him in the wrong way. That's always the foundation of all of these cults. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at those cults. We'll start out actually with the revivals that occurred before those cults to give you an idea of the whole environment that these cults and heresies grew up in. And we'll even conclude by taking a look at a totally different aspect of culture. We'll consider some of the literature and some of the art that existed in the first half of the 19th century. Now the title for this lesson, which you'll want to note, is called Idols of Mercy. And the reason why it's called Idols of Mercy is from an idea found in the book of Hosea. If you remember, Hosea is one of the minor prophets. It comes right after the book of Daniel. And let me read to you a verse from chapter 14, verse 3. This is Israel speaking, really speaking out of repentance, speaking the fact that they are wanting to get rid of idols once and for all. And so they say this to Yahweh, the true God. Neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, that is, the idols they made with their own hands. You are our gods, for in you the fatherless find mercy. In other words, what Israel recognized about idolatry was they began to recognize all the attractions and yet all the dangers of idolatry. So idolatry is always attractive because, first of all, it puts us in control. Instead of God making us in his own image, we get to make the idol in our image. That's why idols always look like people, or if they don't look directly like people, they look like some creature in the known world, but always somehow similar to a human itself. Not only that, but idols are always given powers that are more like superhero powers. So they're kind of like a human, but they are able to do things that a human cannot do, but things that maybe a human could pursue, such as incredible strength, or the incredible ability to know what's going to happen next, or the incredible speed, whatever it may be. They're essentially like those comic book superheroes that we're so familiar with. The other thing about idols, though, is idols always satisfy a need in us to worship something. Because of the way that we're made, because we were made to enjoy God and to worship Him forever, we therefore have to worship something. We're either going to worship Him, the Creator, or we're going to worship something in His creation, thus idols. Idols were always made as a resemblance of what God had made, but it was an opportunity to worship something different, again, something that we could control because we had made it with our own hands. But there's even something more intriguing about idolatry that Hosea points out. And that is that idols actually satisfy our conscience. They make us feel as if we are doing good because, as Hosea points out, the idols actually become idols of mercy. They actually show kindness. They're not just these gods who promise power and promise wealth and fruitfulness, but they're gods who actually promise to be a father to the fatherless, as Hosea points out. And that always is the mistake of most of our heresies, or of most of the politics, or most of the economics, or most of the way that we falsely set up the way that we live in this world. We're always pursuing people who preach things like kindness, who preach things like justice and mercy and humility. But we often don't ask the question, are they actually basing it upon an infinite, triune God who has revealed Himself through the Scriptures, and specifically through His Son who is incarnate? And so we always have to ask that question. Does the message that is being told to us, does it actually point us to that God? And specifically, does it actually point to Christ? We're going to see that with all these false ideas, with these fake gospels, these heresies, or with the various cults, they always messed with God's holiness, or they messed with who Christ was in some way or another. In other words, it's funny, they always promise to us all of these things, but somehow they always have the same message, that we as fallen people can somehow save ourselves, make ourselves holy, and make this world holy. All you need typically is love. It's a very attractive message. It was the message of, say, the 1960s. It was the message the Beatles promoted, as well as many, many others. But that altogether is another story. The whole point is this: the gospel always points us back to God's holiness. It always points us back to the fact that we're not holy. But even though He is this holy God who has complete justified anger at us and at our sin, He is someone who gives us righteousness that we don't deserve. It's a righteousness that we cannot earn, a righteousness that we cannot add to, and a righteousness that we cannot lose. What's funny about all those heresies is they never promote that idea. Because if they did, it would require you to look to the true God. All of the heresies wanted you to look to a solution in this world, specifically a solution to the leader of the cult or the heresy. That's always the warning sign of a false idea, when one person claims all of your worship, as idols of mercy always do. We'll take a look at the details in the next video.